Let's say I am a leader and I interface with you and you start coaching me, and I decide I want to use strengths to manage my team.
Yeah.
Do I need to become a strengths coach to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a simple answer is you have to be skilled. So how you get there, I think, is up to you. But to be a Gallup Global Strength Coach is really a great starting point for that. Because when you are coaching somebody, you're taking a large amount of responsibility, right? You've got people's lives, right? And it's not messing about. And so I think in order to be effective, I think you do need education and training. For managers with teams, I think that you can get a strength-based coach to help you. A coaching certification would be useful. But you can also get trained on how to be a workplace coach, which is less onerous than being a certified coach, but still will give you the basic principles of how to put a strength-based team together. And I think that's important, especially if you are serious about the people that you're working with, rather than thinking that you're going to experiment on them and hope for the best.
I hear you. So an interesting reason, the reason I ask this is I often wonder when we have people coaching within organizations, is there an opportunity for a conflict of interests?
Well, you can't be poacher and gamekeeper at the same time. So there's no problem with a manager being a workplace coach because it's in context. It's within the mandate of the team and their mandate as a manager. And the aim is to help the person be the best version they can be to achieve work outcomes. No problem with that whatsoever. I think it becomes a little bit more tricky if you're HR, right? Because you often have to implement workplace discipline, but yet you want to use a coaching methodology. I think you can use a coaching methodology as an HR person to help influence and build relationships and so on. But pure coaching, I think that's tricky. And then, often what happens is in more traditional viewpoints of coaching needs to be confidential for individuals, not so much teams, right? So for individuals, 95% of the people that I coach at C-suite level all complain about their boss. So now you can't really go, well, I have a problem with my boss, and so they're going to coach me because I don't like them. You're in some really tricky space there, and so on. And there's some things you need to say about the organization that HR does not need to hear about. So I think confidentiality is a key thing to keep in mind. Now, remember, when you talk about managers and teams, that doesn't apply because it's in the work context and the team and complementary partnership. But individuals, I think that's a big issue. And we've got to be quite careful about that. I know that coaching is on one-on-ones, confidentiality is key, but I have two sort of rules that I always apply. One is if you are going to self-harm, I will notify and I tell people up front. And the second one, of course, is that if you can't, I'm not a confessional in that sense. You can't come to me and say, I've stolen from the company for years, now coach me. No. But that's my that's my contracting piece up front.
Yes, I hear you. Okay. So thank you for clarifying that. So being human group, when we read about it, we see strengths. And strengths only go as far as the Clifton Strengths questionnaire, debriefing, and some coaching, right? Or is there more to it?
Yeah, there's much more to that. Gallup's is 40 years old, and we can draw down on quite a few things. So as BHG, we're one of 6 international Gallup licensed training partners. So our reason for existence in many cases is we have the license to train Gallup Global Strength coaches in Africa, not just South Africa, but in Africa, which is way cool. And to that end, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've trained and certified over 150 people across 15 African countries. And that's a great start to our strength story, is that we credential coaches via Gallup so that they continue and build the strength market in the areas that we're interested. So that's right across Africa. So our reason for existing is to be part of the international global strength community on one level by certifying coaches. On another level, we obviously support the Clifton Strengths Assessment. We do a lot of coaching for individuals, managers, and teams. We do a lot in the education and training space, as you can understand. and probably can relate to that, and looking at your report and getting coaching, sometimes you want to go beyond that. So you want to be a workplace coach as a manager, or you want a team workshop where you can start to think about how people can work better together using strengths and so on. And then the final area that we're particularly interested in is we want to help organizations become strength-based. And here we particularly look at 3 areas of intervention. One is, what is required for employee engagement scores to improve? How do we help people perform better? And the third one, which is becoming incredibly relevant now with the pandemic, is how do we help people improve their well-being? Historically, prior to the pandemic, Gallup research indicated that if employee engagement was going up, it was correlated with improved well-being scores. But with the pandemic, we've seen the reverse. We have people who have increasing engagement scores, working harder and harder, but decreasing well-being scores. And obviously, the danger there is recipe for burnout.
Mm. So what you're saying is, step one is, as an individual, I can build I can understand my strengths and I can work on them. I can then take my team and replicate that process and build sort of like an optimized strengths team. And now you're saying I can increase engagement. My entire organization can be affected by this. And does this mean that every single person in my organization must have a strengths profile?
Ideally, of course, if you want to be a strength-based organization and have a strength-based culture, then everybody should know their strengths. The way to think about strengths is that you can build it into the DNA of your organization. So if you think about the employee life cycle, you get recruited, you onboard, you can build a strength-based connection there. You get your first job in the organization, your manager is strength-based, so helps you to perform in a team base and get a complementary partnership. You then can get strength-based development as part of performance development. You then get onto the talent pool, okay, and that can be a strength-based question. Your leadership development can be strength-based. Your succession can be strength-based. So and of course, when you exit eventually, it can be a strength-based exit. So at every stage of your employee life cycle, you can build a strength component or intervention or connection in. And so you can anchor strengths throughout the organization to become a strength-based. But there are a couple of secrets to success here. To become a strength-based organization, it should be a top-down initiative, not where South Africans like to do bottom-up, right? No. It's not democratic in that sense. Top-down, because essentially, whether you are strength-based or not is dependent on how your leaders behave. And that congruence is mission critical. The second component is that it is dependent on having great managers. So managers matter. They're not the marzipan stuck between leaders and their teams and don't know whether they should kiss butt upwards or join the union downwards. We really need a cadre of very professional managers. And then the third thing is people need to know their strengths so that they can manage themselves and others using strengths, which is a positive approach. So you're looking at a value chain horizontal and then a connection vertical, and X marks the spot.
Wonderful. What do people, sort of like the employees that you have worked with in these transitions, what do they say? What's it like to work, or what's different about working in a strengths-based organization? How did they perceive it?
Well, first of all, when they do the strength assessment, there's a bit of a light bulb moment because they go, I didn't know somebody knew me this well. It was like my twin was sitting next to me when I did the assessment. So there's an immense resonance with you investing in me, you interested in who I am. So there's an automatic upside to that. We all are curious and like to talk about ourselves for the right reasons. And for too long, I think organizations have not got to that level and really started to work there. The second thing that we usually get feedback on is they go, now I know why innocent really annoys me before 10 o'clock and I've had 3 cups of coffee because, maximizer or input or whatever is too high a volume. Now I understand what triggers this. If I understand what triggers this, I can manage it, avoid it, ignore it, and move on because I know where they're coming from. I can understand their strength need from me. The third one is I don't now have to be all things to all people and well-rounded. I can be the best version of myself. And if I need help, I can ask for help without being seen as being deficient or incompetent. So, I mean, those gives you some really 3 great clues. And then the final one is that sometimes, when we look at employee engagement, one of the power questions from Gallup is, do I have a best friend at work? Now, that's a great question to ask, and people get really, it's quite controversial. I like it because you either do or you don't. And the reality is, if you don't have a best friend at work, trust and engagement is not where it needs to be. And so the question is, why don't you have a best friend? And it's usually because you go, I can't get on with that person, or I don't know where they're coming from, or they're a threat to me, or whatever the story is. I think strengths takes care of a lot of that anxiety and inborn fear, really. And this is why we like strengths for diversity and inclusion. Not just diversity because we understand uniqueness, but how to make people feel that they belong, not because they are an affirmative action hire or because they've been there 100 years or whatever, because of who they are. And I think that's great.
So I must admit that is something that I've had a really real experience, more than one real experience, where conflict was due to an ism, an ageism, a racism, a sexism. And when we take a look at a bunch of profiles, we see, but everyone has lots of everything. It's not all
Yes.
women have empathy. I know that Gallup does have a couple that they say tend to occur more with younger people, older people, males and females, but in general, there's quite a good mix.
Sorry, just a couple of things around this. One is that, remember, strengths is not an excuse to be a difficult idiot in the corner, right? So you can't say, well, I've got strategic, therefore I'm not going to do any work on the execution side. Well, no, you can't do it that way, right? Yeah, exactly. You can't defend using strengths. The other great thing about diversity and inclusion is you can't insult people with strengths, right? So my number one strength is achiever. Now, if you said to me, Yendor, you're such an achiever, I'm going to go, yeah, I could keep talking that way. I'm happy. So you can't really, so you can't insult, and you can't defend with it, right? But what you can use it with is to start building that I think that psychological safety net with people need. Macrete's had some great experience in the space where she literally had guys who were about to retire at a state-owned enterprise really resist the newcomers to their team in such a way that they didn't even want to sit next to each other. By about lunchtime, though, we had this great sort of, in Afrikaans, they say toenadering, where coming together, where guys were going, well, I didn't know this about you, and that's interesting, and I can help you here, and I can see that you can give me some help there, and why? Because strengths is positive but also neutral. It doesn't, you can't insult people. There's no deficit attached to it, and I'm not expressing an opinion about your competence, right? So it's a language of engagement rather than breaking down, and that's why in those situations it can be quite a dramatic sort of light bulb moment.
That is beautiful. I must say I do enjoy it from that perspective. So can I be a well-rounded individual, or must we rather have well-rounded teams?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The question is, well, as an individual, why do you want to be well-rounded?
Because everyone expects it, right? From the day that we're in grade 1. Well, before then already.
I get it, but just because the school tells you doesn't mean it's correct. So I suppose that's probably the first thing. The second thing is, intuitively we know that we're not well-rounded. Okay, so if you ask me, am I good at some things and not good at others? Oh yes. If you interview my wife, she'll say, Yendor's not allowed literally to play with electricity at home because he shocks himself, right? Now, that's a good indication that I shouldn't be playing around with electricity and, don't do that. So why be well? I'm not an electrician, and I'm quite comfortable with that. And, and it's because I know that I'm valuable as a human being in other areas. And that's the emphasis, is where is your value as a human being? You don't have to be all things to all people. It's nonsense. I mean, I don't want to be an electrician. I'm not a very good one. And so I shouldn't have hubris about pretending to be one, right? And I'm okay to admit that. Why? Because, hey, I can add value in other areas, in my family, my work, and so on. And, that's why you guys pay me to certify, because I'd like to think that I'm a good facilitator, right? That gets me out of the bed in the morning, is where my passion and motivation lies. Now to become an electrician as well, to play around with, no, why? So let's give that a skip. What I would say though is each individual and each team, do need to operate in the execution space, need to be able to influence, build relationships, and do some thinking. It's a human requirement, it's a team requirement, and we can all do that. But the patterns of our strengths, either for individuals or teams, are not well-rounded, and we don't have strengths in each one of those categories, right? So now what? Is there a deficit? No, there isn't. Here's what I love about the intentionality of strengths. Do you know that if my dominant strengths in my top 10 is strategic thinking and execution? And anybody that knows me will not be surprised by this. But yet I have friends, I promise. When I go home, my wife greets me, my kids recognize me, and the dog doesn't bite me. So I can build relationships. And what the fantastic thing about strengths is that you can use strengths in other categories to achieve an outcome where you don't have a strength. So I build friendships using my learner because it's my curiosity mechanism, right? And that's how I sort of connect and get going with people and all that good stuff. And in the same way, individuals and teams can learn to jump those categories. But I think to some extent, you have to operate in all 4 of those categories: execution, influence, relationship building, and strategic thinking, though the balance of those are not even. They're dependent on what you're trying to achieve, right? So sometimes, guys, if the Titanic has hit an iceberg and it's sinking, you're not going to sit around and go, let's do some strategic thinking. No, you're going to go, right, where are those life rafts? Let's get, and you're going to execute, right, aren't you? So context here matters. And sometimes, and this is the great thing about intentionality, is you can start to go, what combinations of strengths do I need in what balance of outcome? So there are times there's executing, there's times to build relationships, there are times to influence the market and each other, and there are times to work smarter, right? Which is where all South African organizations struggle. All we do is try and solve problems by working harder. Well, that's interesting, but that's not good. So let's work smarter, and I don't mean by that lazy, but let's work smarter, and other things will happen.
I think one of the biggest learnings for me with strengths and working with teams specifically was this concept of, instead of trying to be better at something that you're really bad at, there's someone who cannot wait to do it. And just imagine the satisfaction they'll get in doing it.
No, exactly. And I always love it. The number one strength that comes up most dominant across all South Africans who do Strength Finder is responsibility. Love the strength of responsibility, because somebody like myself, for example, will go, right, who has responsibility? That's a person I can delegate to because they are very, there we go. Crack on. And, Innocent, with your responsibility and input, I know that you'll take it very seriously. Of course, the downside of that is that eventually you start sinking because, so you always have to make sure that you get the balance right. But, absolutely. So we love the complementarity thing. And I think in 2 ways. One is, it's powerful to say that you're not good at something and know that you're not going to be struck by lightning. Listen, I hate admin. I can do it, but why should I if it sucks the life out of me? Maybe we should, there are admin people that love to do the job. I have other value that I can bring to the team. And I think that's incredibly important. The second thing is the fact that we can work together to achieve an outcome if we get tired at the hip there. But to know how to, I think, is often the problem. And, it's great just to reduce the internal competition in teams, to say, listen, I've suck at that. Let's see what we can do together. So from that perspective, I think all useful.
Wonderful. So Yendor, thank you so much for visiting with us today. A last question, although I think we've actually covered multiple angles of it, is, do you have a favorite productivity tip?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking to somebody with execution and strategic thinking, Innocent. So this is not a difficult one, but this is one for me, right? So my achiever would always have a list of things to do every single day, and I tick them off. It keeps me incredibly focused. I combine that with my deliberatives, so I anticipate what could go wrong and remove obstacles before they do that. And then I often combine my achiever with my strategic to go, there must more than one way of skinning a cat, right? So which is the best way for me at this stage to avoid the obstacles my deliberative has given rise to, and I can tick off the boxes. Recruit gave me some great advice last year at pandemic level 5 because my achiever was in hyperdrive and the world was just not cooperating, right? And so my head was about to explode. And she said, you know what? Strategic thinking is also work. It's an activity you can tick off, so spend some time there. And that's what I did. So it's been tremendously powerful. And I think to her great relief, I wasn't sending out emails at 2 o'clock in the morning, go, hey, let's do this, let's do that, rather than, well, let's think a little bit about this and what would our clients want and all that good stuff that I think makes good business, really. So those are two things, but they're very personal to myself. Of course, you would have different ones. I know
Yes.
your input would be demanding in a different way. So each one of them really has to find what works for you, you know.
I must tell you, when the pandemic struck, I was reading up absolutely everything. I was addicted to try and get as much information about this as possible. You can see
Right.
my input just went over the top. I had to tone it down a bit.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you for sharing that productivity tip, because what I really loved is you really brought to life something that can be drawing on a piece of paper if a coach or if someone didn't guide you, and if you didn't work at your strengths. It's more than just saying it on paper. It's about living it. So Yendor, thank you so much, and thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having you. Well, first we'll have Margriet for a visit, and then I hope to have you back soon.
Yeah, I think she'll give you a totally different insight, so well worth it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much, Yendor.
Excellent.
So, everyone, thanks for joining us for, well, again, 2 episodes, because we get so much good content from our coffee companions that I really battle to whittle it down to 1 session only. Thanks to Yendor Felgate from Being Human Group for all of his insights around strengths. And of course, he had his website name on the bottom of the screen. So feel free to reach out to him there if you have any questions. And if you've liked this and you're following us on YouTube, then please click on like and subscribe. And remember to click on the little notification button to be sure that you know when next we are bringing you some more content. If you're following us on LinkedIn or on Facebook, then please like, subscribe, share, comment, query, ask. Please, we love to hear from you all. But if we don't hear from you before, then we will see you next week at the Performance Cafe.